Okay.
I'm ready.
We're setting. We need just a minute to set up the webinar on Facebook Live. So
Okay.
just a few seconds. It's redirecting to Facebook Live page.
Good.
Okay. So I think we're live now. Okay, so we can start.
Okay.
So good afternoon. First, to all the persons who registered to our webinar or at our webinar tonight, and specifically to the audience as well who are watching us on Facebook Live or through the Facebook Live. Let me first announce the Culinary and Wine Thursdays concept. It is actually a series of webinars that will actually take place every Thursday, introducing definitely educational topics in the gastronomic and wine sectors. We will be hosting every week different people who are actually pioneers and professionals in both fields, and they will be sharing their knowledge and experience to the audience and to the people who will be registering with us. You can definitely later on after the webinar check it on our pages and social media channels. Now let me welcome Mr. Alexis Caraux, who is our partner French sommelier. Alexis will actually kick off with the first webinar as part of the series of webinars every Thursday. And Mr. Caraux actually comes from a family of reputed French restaurateurs. So I guess this is in your blood, the gastronomy and the wine, Alexis.
Sure.
And as we met each other, you for a fact obtained your WSET, which stands for the Wine and Spirits Education Trust. So it is an advanced diploma in wine and spirits. And later, you brought on a team of passionate people like you to give courses and master classes, as well as wine tastings in France, right? And it's working properly well. You have your master classes as well, and you'll be definitely partnering with us for future master classes on our platform. Okay, so today you will be addressing the the basics of the French wine. I will leave the floor to you now, so you can start your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. So hello everybody. I'm very pleased to be with you today. So I'm French. I'm gonna present myself very shortly. So today we are here together to talk about the French wine, but I'm going to give you an overview of French wine. So this is kind of an introduction. So I'm going to explain a bit the different wine region very quickly and give you some information, how to read the French labels and other information. So we're going to be together for, let's say, 1 hour approximately. And we're going to start right away, okay? So this presentation is, I call it the basics of French wine, and the objective is to give you some keys to know what you drink when you come across a bottle of French wine. So basically, again, 1 hour together, make yourself comfortable. Don't hesitate to maybe to switch off your mobile notifications, and if you can keep 1 hour, that's perfect. All right, and you can also write down your questions. There should be a chat, I think, with the Zoom and on Facebook. So don't hesitate to write down your questions. And Marianne and her team, they're gonna write them down, and so we can come back on them maybe at the end of the webinar. All right. So just a short presentation. I'm gonna be quick on this because I don't want to spend too much time on this because we have a lot to cover today. But Marianne, she already presented me quickly. So I'm French. My name is Alexis Caraux. You can follow me on Instagram. I give you my Instagram account. So I'm a French sommelier, wine consultant. I'm working in the wine industry since 2011. And I created a range of wine tasting classes in Paris to teach French wines to visitors coming to France. So I've been teaching French wines for several years now, welcoming dozens and hundreds of visitors. I've been also working with some French restaurants to help them build their wine list and also training the staff. I'm traveling also quite a lot, of course, not these last months, but traveling and giving wine lectures in different countries in Europe, but also in the US. And these last years, I have been also in charge of some wineries in the Loire Valley, the Bordeaux appellation. So I'm not spending too much time on this because that's not the core of the presentation today. If you have any questions, we can come back later on my career in the wine business. So let's get started to our subject today, the basics of French wine. Basically, I have divided the presentation into three different parts. The first is a kind of an introduction, and I'm going to give you three keys to understand, to have a better understanding about French wine. That's going to be the first part, a global introduction. On part number 2, I'm going to cover briefly the 6 major wine regions. So I mean, talking about the grape varieties, the styles of the wines, and a few info when you read the labels. And the last part will be dedicated to some vocabulary that you might find on labels, and also that will help you pick, choose, select the best value French wines. All right. So this is how the presentation will take place on 3 different parts, and we're going to start right away the first part. So the 3 keys to understand French wine. So first, let me show you this map. This is the map of France. I don't know if you're familiar or not with France, but basically on this map you have all the major wine regions. You have a different color, so each color corresponds to a big major region. You can see the Loire Valley, the green, the light green. You can see Champagne and Alsace, and you can see that Champagne, it's the wine region the more on the north. Then going south, there is the Burgundy, the Beaujolais, and the Rhône. You have Bordeaux, which is on the, you can see Bordeaux is on the southwest of France. And all along the Mediterranean side, you have the Languedoc and the Provence. So we're going to cover 6 of them just later on, and also, of course, say a few words briefly about the other ones just in a moment. Okay, so this is the map of France. Now, the first key that you need to know, I think, is I'm calling this the whites and reds. The thing is, if you draw a virtual line, if you divide the map of France into 2 different parts, the north part and the south part, if you dive into the different regions on each part, you will see that you will find a majority of white wines in the north part of France and a majority of reds in the south. Okay, so that's the first thing. You need to know that you need to keep in mind that in France, the more south that you go, the warmer the climate will be. So it's much warmer in the south and much cooler in the north. So basically, you'll find more white in the north and more reds in the south. So in the north, the Loire Valley, they produce a majority of white. You have the Champagne, Alsace. Alsace is a big white wine production. Burgundy is a bit in between, because the north of Burgundy, that's the Chablis. Chablis is only white. And then if you go south, well, you will arrive in the Bordeaux, in the Rhône, where that's a majority of red wine. So let's say that also to ripen the red grapes, they need more sun. They need more warmer climate. So the ripeness of the red varieties, it's much better when they got bigger amount of sun. And the thing is, in the north part also, when you produce a white, especially the dry white wines, you really want to keep some freshness and acidity in the wines. So that's why also you get this freshness and acidity with cooler climate, so in the north part of France. Okay, so keep in mind this. That's the first key. if you prefer white wines, maybe have a look on the north of France. If you prefer red wines, that's mine, the south. But of course, you can find red in the north also, and some white in the south. So that's the first key. Key number two, well, if we still refer to this virtual line, you will see that in the north part of France, the majority of the wines, they are made of just one grape variety. So when you pick a bottle of French wine made in the north part, it's going to be, in most cases, 100% of one grape, what I call varietal wine. So for instance, 100% Chardonnay or 100% Sauvignon Blanc, 100% Riesling in Alsace. And in the south, well, the majority of the wines, they are blend of different grapes. So they mix different grapes together. So maybe the most famous, that's the Bordeaux. A typical red Bordeaux is a mix of the Cabernet Sauvignon grape and the Merlot grape, okay? And that's the same in the Rhône with other grapes. So the main reason for this is that sometimes in the south of France, with the warm climate and the heat, just one grape alone is a bit unbalanced. Maybe too much alcohol or too much tannins. So the winemakers at the wineries, they need to balance the wines, and that's why they will try to blend, to mix different grapes together. Okay, so that's the second thing that you need to keep in mind. One grape in the north part of France, and in the south, the majority of the wines, different grapes blended together. Now, the third key, number three, which is also very important to understand French wine, is that in France, if you know the region where your wine comes from, then you can guess what's behind the label, what's inside the bottle. So region is very key to understand French wine. So I'm saying this because when you come across a bottle of French wine, if you pick a bottle, in most cases, you will not find so much information about the grape varieties, the styles of the wines, and that's French wine. So that's why if you don't know what you have when you pick a bottle of wine, try to identify the region. And as soon as you know the region, okay, you can guess a bit what you have, because each French wine region has really its own identity, I would say. So let's look at just two examples right here. For instance, you pick a bottle of wine that's a white from Burgundy. Well, a white, you know, this is from Burgundy. That's going to be a dry Chardonnay in most cases. So a white Burgundy would be a dry Chardonnay in the most cases. Same if you pick a bottle and that's a red wine, and you see this is a bottle of Bordeaux. Well, in most cases, this is going to be a dry, high tannin Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this a bit later when we dive into the different regions. But keep in mind that if you pick a bottle of French wine and you have no idea what you have inside, try to identify the region, and then each region has its identity, and you can understand better what you have behind the label. Okay, so these are the three main keys to understand French wine. So remember, north part of France, more white, south, more red. North part of France, majority of just one variety. South, that's a blend. And also keep in mind that to understand French wine, region is key. So if you know a bit each region and what the styles of the wine on each region, then you can understand what you have behind the labels. Okay. Just to continue a little bit on this region and identity, that's a few tips and to find the region. This is a typical, you have on the right a typical label of French wine. So on French bottles, you will always come across names of locations. So try to find that's the location of production, okay? So to find the location of production on a French wine label, search for the appellation, okay? So appellation, we have this concept in France at the appellation. You can also find this in Italy or in Spain or Portugal in Europe. An appellation, let's say that's a geographical location where the wines that are produced following some strict specifications. So for instance, in terms of viticulture, allowed grape varieties, or winemaking process. So on most bottles of French wine, you're going to find appellation and the location of production. Or if you don't see appellation, sometimes you have IGP. That's a regional appellation, let's say. And the thing is, if you enter a wine shop or if you look at any wine list in different restaurants, you will see that the wines, they are always organized by region. So just if you pick a bottle, just try to identify in the list on which region it is, and then you can guess what you have. So here, for instance, you have this label, Morgon. So Morgon is a village, it's an appellation which is in the Beaujolais region, and a typical Beaujolais region, that's a fruity red wine made with the Gamay grape variety. All right. So again, try to identify the region. And for this, you also need to know the location of production, which is written on the label with the appellation. So I'm not entering in too many details about the appellation because it can get very complex, but you need to know that an appellation, that's a location of production. So this is another example. You have this label. This is a Meursault. Meursault, that's a famous village in Burgundy. So a typical Meursault, a typical white from Burgundy, that's a dry Chardonnay. And in Meursault, they have also the tradition of oak aging. So this is, again, a typical label that will not tell you so much information about the grape varieties and the style of the wine. But if you know at least that's a wine from Burgundy, then you can guess, okay, this is going to be dry, made with Chardonnay. Okay, so this was an introduction about French wine. Now we're going to dive into the different wine regions. So I have identified 6 major wine regions, but we're going to look also quickly and briefly to the other ones. But so we're going to see the Champagne, Loire Valley, the Burgundy region, Bordeaux, the Rhône, and the Languedoc. Okay. So let's start with the first quiz. That's Champagne. So I'm sure you all know that Champagne, that's a very premium and famous sparkling wine. That's maybe the most famous sparkling wine in the world. Champagne means that's also the name of an administrative region. So it's in the north part of France. It's not far from Paris, just a few kilometers east. And to be called Champagne, the grapes, they must come from this Champagne region. So if you find a sparkling from another location, it will not be called Champagne. It will have another name. So in Champagne, basically they grow. We are in the north part of France. So remember, that's a cooler wine region, a cooler climate. So basically, they grow some grapes that grow well with the cool conditions, and they grow the Pinot Noir, the Pinot Meunier, and the Chardonnay. So typical Champagne is a blend of these varieties, but you can also find 100% Pinot Noir or 100% Chardonnay. Okay. So then Champagne, they have a complex process for winemaking. I'm not going to enter into this, but I'm going to show you a few labels just to explain a few notations. Okay. Champagne. So I have here a beautiful picture of the harvest in end of August, beginning of September. So Champagne, it's a very huge vineyard. It's very big, and you can see people doing the harvest by hand. This is mandatory. All the grapes in Champagne must be harvested by hand. So every autumn they hire approximately 100,000 people to do the hand harvest. So lots of labor in September in Champagne. So this is a typical label for a bottle of champagne. I'm sure you all know this famous brand, the Veuve Clicquot. Veuve Clicquot. So you see on the label it's written champagne, and below the brand Veuve Clicquot you have Brut. Brut, that's the most common champagne. It means dry, but not too dry. Okay, there is still a bit of residual sugar, maybe difficult to feel, but that's not the driest champagne. I'm going to talk later about the labels, but for instance, extra Brut will be much drier than the Brut, but the Brut, that's the most common. And last thing about champagne, you will see that most bottles of champagne, they don't show any vintage, because most champagnes, they are a blend of different years, different vintages. The vintage champagne, that only produced the years with the best conditions. All right. So this is Champagne. Another major region is the Loire Valley. So the Loire Valley, it's a very long and wine region. If you can see this on the map, because it starts on the west on the Atlantic Ocean, and it goes east, and then it starts in the southeast of France, almost close to the Rhône. So that's a very wide region, and the word to defines the best the Loire is diversity. So there is a diversity of climates, because on the west you have the influence of the ocean that you don't find when you are more on the east, which is more like a continental climate. There's a diversity of grapes and also a diversity of wine styles. And I really think that in the Loire you can find all the different wine styles, the white, the different whites, the reds, rosé, sparkling, everything. So here I'm covering the 4 major grape varieties. On the east, first you have the Sauvignon Blanc. So remember, we are in the north part of France, so 100% Sauvignon Blanc, no blend. So typical Sauvignon Blanc, dry, very dry and very aromatic. Lots of flavors, fruity flavors, mineral and flowery flavors. The most famous spot for Sauvignon Blanc, you might have heard of Sancerre. So Sancerre, that's the typical Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley. Okay. Another grape is when you go a bit more west after the Sancerre, if you follow the Loire River, you will arrive in the Herche. That's close to where I live, and the city of Tours. This is the place where you find the Chenin Blanc. So Chenin Blanc, wine variety, 100% Chenin Blanc, and it's I love the Chenin Blanc because they can also produce dry white, sweet white, sparkling, all different styles of white wine. A famous spot is Vouvray. That's a famous vineyard producing Chenin Blanc, different styles of whites. And we are really in the central, in the heart of the Loire Valley. Okay. And then if you continue, if you continue sailing on the Loire, arriving at the ocean, you will arrive in the west part of the Loire. That's where they grow the muscadet. So muscadet, with the muscadet, they make dry and mineral whites. That's really on the west part of the Loire. And we always say that the muscadet is one of the best match with seafood, and especially oysters. Okay, and that's a very good value for money wine, the Muscadet. So these are three white grape varieties: Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin Blanc, and Muscadet, three major whites. But they grow also some red varieties, especially in the hut close to the city of Tours. They grow the Cabernet Franc. Okay, Cabernet Franc produces reds with between medium and high tannins, medium body reds. It depends also a little bit about the different terroirs, the soil characteristics, but you may find some bottles of great Cabernet Franc at Chinon or Bourgueil, two very interesting spots for the Cabernet Franc. Okay, so this is the Loire Valley. I might have a few pictures. So it's a lovely region to visit, and because if you arrive in Paris, you take a train. It's just 1 hour with the high-speed train, and it's a beautiful region because there is not only the wines, but also a lot of history. In the past, the kings of France, they all wanted to build their own castles. So lots of lovely castles when you drive along the Loire. That's a beautiful place for this. So on the left, there's a picture of Sancerre, small hills, beautiful, lovely place. And then you see on the right the Chateau de Saumur castles with the vines and most of the different castles, they are just built on top of hills dominating the Loire. So that's really a beautiful place. You can also, if you like riding, you can just ride along the Loire. That's a beautiful place. Okay. Two labels of Loire Valley wines. So on the left, you have a bottle of Vouvray, the famous Chenin Blanc, and especially this one it's written on the label Moelleux. Moelleux means sweet. So this is a sweet Chenin Blanc from the Loire Valley. On the right, you have a bottle of Bourgueil from Domaine du Bel Air, 2014. 100% Cabernet Franc. Remember, Cabernet Franc, that's really the red variety for the Loire. They have also other grapes, and they grow a bit of Pinot Noir, of Gamay, but if you have to remember just one grape for the reds, that's the Cabernet Franc. So let's continue now. We have covered Champagne and the Loire, and now we go more on the east of France to Burgundy. So Burgundy is the home. It's a small wine region for the production, but it's very small, but it's very famous for its Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So that's really the place where you find one of the best Pinot Noir and Chardonnay wines in the world. Unfortunately, that's a region where the prices, they go crazy every year, very expensive wines. And in Burgundy, you find all the most expensive wines in the world because there is small production and a huge and big demand for those wines. So the prices go very high. So if you dive into Burgundy, you will see that you can divide the Burgundy into 5 sub-regions. On the north, you have Chablis. So Chablis, that's only white, dry and buttery whites with some minerality, the Chablis whites. Then you have the Côte de Nuit, a bit more east, where you find the best Pinot Noir, amazing wines. Unfortunately, very expensive again. Côte de Beaune, the best Chardonnay as well. Remember just a few slides before, there was a label of Meursault. So Meursault comes from this Côte de Beaune. And if you continue going south in Burgundy, you will have the Côte Chalonnaise and the Mâconnais, so mostly whites, a bit of reds in the Côte Chalonnaise as well. So for Burgundy, remember, if you have something to remember, first, that's the grapes, a white Chardonnay, a red, that's the Pinot Noir. But then also the best value wines, they are ranked as Premier Cru and Grand Cru. But that's also those wines very expensive today on the market. but that's the best values for Burgundy wines. When you buy a bottle of Premier Cru or Grand Cru, you expect something great. All right. So I might have a few pictures of Burgundy. Wow, you have lots of lovely villages like this in Burgundy. This is a picture, I think, in the south of the Côte de Nuit, with vines and just around. Beautiful place. Another label for a bottle of Burgundy wine. So lots of information on Burgundy label, but at least if you know that you have a bottle of Burgundy, remember that a white will be a dry Chardonnay in most cases, and a red will be a Pinot Noir. So here, this one is a great quality. You have the Premier Cru notation. Remember what I said. When you come across Premier Cru or Grand Cru, means that you have something great. So, and something that you find here on the label, which is really typical from Burgundy, they give you the name of the plot of vines. It's called Les Pucelles. So you know exactly where your wine comes from. Okay. So let's continue. Well, let's make a stop at Bordeaux, of course. Bordeaux is maybe the most famous wine region in the world. Bordeaux, they produce a majority of red wines. Two major grapes at Bordeaux, the Merlot and the Cabernet Sauvignon. They have also a bit of other varieties, but remember those two. If you dive into the Bordeaux region, basically you can divide Bordeaux in two parts. And there's a big river crossing Bordeaux. So there's the left bank and the right bank. On the left bank, so that's the western part of Bordeaux, that's a place where they grow in majority the Cabernet Sauvignon. So on famous appellations like Pauillac, which are villages, Pauillac, Saint-Estèphe, Saint-Julien, and Margaux. And on the right bank, you have the Merlot, which is the dominant grape variety, with famous appellations like Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. So that's where you find the best wines just on those villages. Okay, so majority of reds in Bordeaux, of course, they produce a bit of dry whites and sweet whites, but remember those distinction between the east and the west of Bordeaux. And the best also, there are lots of different classifications at Bordeaux, so I'm not entering too many details because that's a bit complex, but some of them, they are ranked as Grand Cru Classic, which are the best values in Bordeaux. So I might have a few pictures. So this is a picture of the lovely Saint-Emilion village. So if you visit Bordeaux, you can't avoid visiting Saint-Emilion. It's a lovely village surrounded by vines. And this is a typical bottle of Bordeaux. So first you can see the shape, the typical Bordeaux shape, which is the wine that you find at Bordeaux. And also the chateau concept. All the wines at Bordeaux, I mean the majority, they are labeled as chateau something. So they have this strong chateau concept at Bordeaux. Chateau means castle, but there are more than 8,000 wineries at Bordeaux, and most of them, they are called chateau something, but they don't have all a castle to show. So well, that's a lot of marketing. So here you have the Grand Vin de Château Latour, which is a famous and premium Bordeaux, delicious Cabernet Sauvignon blend. All right, so after Bordeaux, we have the Rhône, which is another major region, the Rhône Valley. The Rhône, they produce also a majority of red wines. And now we are leaving Bordeaux. Bordeaux was the spot for Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. And when we arrive in the Loire, in the Rhône, sorry, that's the home of the Syrah and Grenache. Syrah and Grenache. Same, there is you can divide the Rhône in two parts. On the north, the northern Rhône, that's where you find the Syrah grape, famous spots, Côte, Hermitage, Saint-Joseph, very steep slopes for the vineyards, beautiful landscapes. And in the south, that's the place where you find in majority the Grenache, but the Grenache not alone, Grenache blend with different grapes, with the Syrah and other local varieties. So a famous spot for the Grenache in the south of the Rhône, that's Châteauneuf-du-Pape. I think that's where you find the best wines in the south of the Rhône Valley. And the majority of the wines in the Rhône, they are labeled as with the Côte du Rhône appellation. So Côte du Rhône appellation means that the grapes can come from all over the region. That's the half of the production. Okay, so majority of reds, a few local whites as well, but majority of red wines. So two pictures of two different landscapes. So the first on the left, that's on the north of the Rhône, so very steep slopes. You can imagine that during harvest and all the viticulture is quite complex with such landscapes. And the picture on the right, that's the southern Rhône. So there's no more steep slopes, it's much wider, and you arrive slowly to the Mediterranean Sea. So I think this picture on the right, that's the Châteauneuf-du-Pape. We can see in the distance this big tower. Beautiful place as well. And that's also a very windy place. Huh? Lots of strong wind blowing all the year. And there's an advantage of this strong wind, that because it avoids, it dry a bit the vines, because the vines usually doesn't like the humidity, so it dries the wines, and it removes also all the different disease that can be stuck in the vines. This is a typical label from a bottle of the Rhône. So this is a Hermitage, which is a premium and rare wine, not easy to find, quite expensive, this one. So Hermitage, again, appellation, Hermitage contrôlé, La Chapelle. And I don't know if you see this, but that's a 14.5 alcohol. So quite high alcohol, because keep in mind that this vineyard is more in the south of France, so more heat, more sun, so more alcohol in the wines as well. And we are finishing the 6 major region by the Languedoc-Roussillon. So Languedoc is on the Mediterranean Sea, starting, I would say, in the Rhône and going down to Spain. Here, mostly reds. They grow the Syrah, the Grenache, the Mourvedre, and also the Carignan. Carignan, not so famous, but that's a variety I really love, especially when it's grown in between small hills with a bit of freshness in altitude. You need to know that Languedoc, that's the region #1 in France in terms of wine production. So it used to supply, to provide the French very low and cheap table wines, so very low quality with big volumes of productions. But things have really changed since now 20, 25, 30 years with very delicious wines produced there. So that's, I think, for me, the best region in terms of value for money in the south of France. The wines here, they are full-bodied. Again, we're in the south, so much heat and sun and a warm climate. So wines they are full-bodied, spices. So a few names of appellations of interest: Corbière, Minervois, Coteaux du Languedoc, also with the wine production. And also in the Roussillon part, which is close to Spain, they produce a few wines that are really similar to port wines. It's called Vin doux naturel. So Vin doux naturel, if you like port, you should try this. That's a sweet red or sweet wines. fortified wines with a degree of alcohol a bit higher, and that's delicious with a chocolate or cheese. Good pairing. So this is a picture of the environment. So here that's the city of Carcassonne. Again, a lovely place to visit. If you visit the vineyards in the Languedoc, you can't avoid visiting this lovely village of Carcassonne, and you will see that vines all around this beautiful city. A label of vin naturel. So I was talking about this sweet wine produced in the Languedoc. They produce also these wines with a bit of color. That's delicious. That's my favorite pairing with a dessert, with a chocolate or coffee and caramel dessert. That's really lovely. And the advantage of such wines that you can let it open very long. It's already a bit oxidated, so you can just have a small glass of wine of it every day. Let's continue. So, I have covered 6 major regions. Just want to say a few words about the others very quickly. So, Alsace. So Alsace, that's the region close to Germany on the far east of France. So Alsace, they grew mostly whites. The most famous, that's the Riesling. They used to produce sweet Riesling a lot, and now there is people drink more and more dry white wines, and so there are now some amazing and delicious dry Riesling produced in the Alsace. Very interesting, with lots of minerality. What else? We have Provence, which is the world spot for rosé wines. So that's Provence. 90% of the wines in Provence, that's rosé. Rosé from Provence for summertime. Another region, that's the Beaujolais. So Beaujolais is just in the south of Burgundy. So Beaujolais, typical Beaujolais wine is a light, fruity, easy drinking red wine produced with the Gamay grape. So if you search for a wine that very easy drinking and a match all wine, that's a wine from the Beaujolais. Very simple, and can drink it a bit refreshed. That's delicious. Another region, Corsica, for me, that's an amazing region in terms of quality. It has changed so quickly since the 15 last year. So there is a new generation of winemakers in Corsica producing high quality wines. They have an amazing climate in Corsica because this is a mountain in the Mediterranean Sea. So a bit the vines, they can have some freshness a bit higher in altitude, but also there is strong wind in Corsica. It's a very sunny place. So that's an amazing spot in Corsica. They grow a lot of very local varieties, and that's really Corsica is producing wines of growing quality and interest. So I'm really thinking, I really believe that in the coming years, we're going to talk more and more about the amazing wines produced in this island. What else we have? Well, in the southwest, we have talked about Bordeaux, but just when you leave Bordeaux and you continue going south, there are lots of different small vineyards. We put them all in what we call the southwest region. So Bordeaux styles, a big influence on by Bordeaux, but you can find also some interesting whites, both dry and sweet, if you explore the southwest of France. And the last I wanted to mention also is the Jura. Jura is very popular right now. That's a small region, but producing mostly whites, but amazing Chardonnay and another grape that's called the Savagnin. The wines, they have a particular winemaking process. Some of the wines, they are oxidated during the winemaking process, and they offer amazing wine pairing with lots of spicy dishes. So Jura is very interesting as well. It's a region of growing interest a lot. So I have covered all the different wine regions very briefly to give you an overview. So I want to finish this presentation by giving you a few keywords on what you can find on French labels. So a few words of vocabulary. So the first, I have mentioned it previously, but Grand Cru, when you see Grand Cru, first, the word cru, C-R-U, is a reference to a vineyard. So a Grand Cru is a premium vineyard producing wines of high quality. So it's regulated. If this is written Grand Cru, it's not a marketing word. That's really regulated by strict laws in France. So a vineyard producing wines with the highest level of quality. So it's always associated with an appellation. For instance, appellation Saint-Émilion Grand Cru contrôlé. Okay, same in Burgundy. For instance, you have an example, Clos de Vougeot Grand Cru. So to make it simple, when you see Grand Cru, you expect something of the best quality. All right. Premier Cru. So Premier Cru, very similar to the previous, to Grand Cru. It's a regulated notation as well, which is associated with an appellation. You will find Premier Cru in Burgundy, Champagne, producing again wines with a high level of quality. It's also often associated to a village, so it corresponds to the best plots of vines inside a village. So the same, when you drink a Premier Cru, you also expect something great of high quality. So an example in Burgundy, appellation Saint-Aubin Premier Cru contrôlé. That's another example. What else? We have Côte, Côte du Rhône, Côte Rôtie. So the word Côte in French means slopes or hillside. So basically, that's in most cases the places where you find the best wines everywhere in the world. The best wines are always on the slopes because the grapes, they get a better exposure, the water is drained away, the grapes are more protected. But beside, Côte means slopes or hillside. It's often associated to an appellation. For instance, in the northern Rhône, we have Côte Rôtie. Côte Rôtie, that's a famous spot for great red wines made with the Syrah grape. And the most famous Côte, maybe the Côte du Rhône, that's the name of the generic and regional appellation in the Rhône. So Côte, this is about the landscape, okay? Vieilles vignes, something that you can find a lot. It's not regulated, vieilles vignes. So vieilles vignes means old vines. Basically, usually more than 40 years old. Sometimes it can be 60 years old, 80 years old, even 100 years old. It's not regulated, so be careful about this notation. But the idea about the vieilles vignes is that when a vine becomes older, the vine will produce less quantity, but of better quality with more concentration. So then resulting in better quality wines. So when you see vieilles vignes, usually that's often the best wine within a winery offer. Okay. A few words about the champagne notation. So I have mentioned this when we talked about champagnes just a few minutes before. So brut, most common champagne. Brut means dry, but here you have different notation. You have, so in the middle you find again this Veuve Clicquot brut. On the left you have an extra brut. So remember, extra brut is even drier than brut. I love the extra brut. I really think that's really good in aperitif, very dry and crisp, refreshing champagne. And on the right, you have a demi-sec. So demi-sec means you have a bit of residual sugar. So a champagne a bit sweet. So it's very rare to find now a demi-sec because I really see that people, they really want to drink dry wines today. but traditionally, some houses of champagne, they still produce this demi-sec champagne with a little sweetness. So be careful now. Be careful with a few notations that you might find as well. Grand vin. When you see grand vin, the meaning of grand vin is premium wine. This is not regulated. This is in most cases pure marketing. If you enter a supermarket, you see very cheap bottle of wines. It says grand vin. Well, that's just marketing. So be careful with the grand vin notation, okay? It's pure marketing and not regulated. Also be careful with the different rewards, the medals and everything. Sometimes you find on wine shops or other places these gold medals, silver medals, etc. Just keep in mind one thing. The best wineries never show medals. So the notoriety of a winery is much more important than a medal. So keep really this in mind. And all the best wines that don't show any medals. So it's a way of rewarding a few wineries every year. So be careful about this. Then we have also all the different organic notations, because organic, that's something bigger and bigger every year in France. Lots of different wineries doing some conversion into organic viticulture. You have the green logo, which is on the left. AB means agriculture biologique, organic wines. Or you have these leaves with all the stars. That's the European Union logo for organic. But then you have also the Demeter logo. So Demeter, this is organic, but even further, it's biodynamics. So I'm not entering in too many details about biodynamics, but it's an organic viticulture going further in how they feed the vines and etc. And also the biodivin that you might find as well, which means organic also. And to finish, I wanted to give you some great vintages. The quality of a vintage will be different from one region to another. So the quality of a wine depends on lots of parameters, but also on the vintage. And I wanted to give you, to finish, some recent vintages that are great everywhere in France, okay? Not just in one region, but everywhere. 2005, that's a huge and beautiful vintage in every place in France. 2009 and 10 as well. And more recently, 2015 and 16. So especially these two last, 2015 and 16, I think you can still find wines on the market today. So if you hesitate between a few bottles, maybe more recent, like 17 or 18, and you have also 15 and 16, I would recommend you to consider these two, because especially the 16 is for me an amazing vintage that will age very long for the best wines. Okay, so keep these vintages in mind for if you want to buy a great bottle of wine. Okay, so I think we arrive at the end of this presentation. Well, we have been together now for 1 hour. Let's see if we have something else. Yeah, that's time for questions. If you have any questions. That was quite intense, I'm sure, because I gave you lots of different informations. Let me see if there are some questions. Yeah, okay, so now I have finished my presentations and I'm ready to answer any question that you might have about French wine or something I did not cover. So thank you for Diana, very interesting presentation. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Well, Alexis, thank you very much. It was very interesting as usual.
Thank you.
Actually, we have one question from a person who is attending on Facebook Live, from Ryan. So he's asking if you could tell us, please, more about the sweet wines. Actually, give us some more information about sweet wines, maybe.
Okay, sure. So sweet wines, the first thing I want to say is that there are different ways of producing sweet wines. The first way, that's what they do in the Loire, where I'm living. They just leave the grapes much longer on the vines. So part of the water inside the grapes will be maybe evaporated, and they will concentrate the sugar. So when they pick the grapes, the juice is really full of sugar. They do the fermentation to make a wine, but they don't ferment all the sugar. So there is some residual sugar at the end. So that's the most common way to produce a sweet wine, just to do late harvest, to let the grapes a bit longer in the vines. But then, depending on the regions, there are a few other processes to produce sweet wine. I mentioned in the south of France the vin doux naturel. So they make sweet wines like port. So for this, they start a usual fermentation to make a wine, and they will stop the fermentation by the addition of a strong grape alcohol. So what happens is that when you bring a strong alcohol, it will stop the fermentation. So you still have some residual natural sugar that have not been fermented. So that's another way of producing sweet wines. And the last, that's the wine which is used at Sauternes in Bordeaux, with some particular conditions. The grapes, they are attacked by a kind of fungus, and the fungus will remove the part of the water from the grapes and concentrate the aromas and the sugar. And so when they pick the grapes, that's what they call the noble rot, producing very delicious sweet wines. So this is about how they make sweet wines, and generally in the different region. But what I want to say is that all the sugar that you feel when you drink a glass of sweet wine, it's always natural sugar. They will never add some sugar into the wine to produce a sweet wine. That's all natural. So what else do you have? Oh, Marianne, if your mic is switched off, so maybe if you speak, I can't hear you.
Now, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Yes, so actually someone also asked about, let me read what he asked about the muscadet as well. So someone is saying that you have already said that muscadet best matches with seafood and oysters. What about meat and cheese? So maybe we can elaborate more on the meat and cheeses, and with what it can be paired, actually with which type of wines it can be paired.
Well, the cheese, it's funny because in France, we have a strong tradition of pairing the cheese with red wine, which I really think it's not the best wine food pairings. The problem with red wines is that you have this tannin. So the tannins, it's coming from the winemaking process. And when you make a red wine, you mix together the juice and the skin of the grapes, and the skin of the grapes bring the tannins. It's a bit like a dust or these microscopic things. Well, the tannins, they don't like the milk protein, and they react not very well with the creamy cheese. They give the cheese some irony taste, what I don't like very much, unless the red has really low tannin or is very old. But in most cases, I would prefer pairing cheese with a white, and especially also because the cheese, and I'm talking about French cheese, they're very salty. And when you eat something very salty, you need some freshness and some acidity to balance the saltiness of the food. And a way to balance the saltiness is to bring freshness, acidity, and this works well with whites in general, but also with sparkling. Sparkling is another interesting wine for pairing cheese. So that's for cheese. And for the meat, the red meats, coming back to the red wines, the tannin coming from the red wines, they love the meat protein and the fat coming from the meat. They work really well together. So that's why we love opening a bottle of red wine with a piece of meat, especially a piece of red meat. But in general, white, especially dry white wines, are easier to pair with than red wine, because the red wine has this additional component, the tannin. All right.
So the next question is actually from Badr, who is also a participant in the webinar. So he's asking, let me read what he's asking. How is the weather change happening in the world nowadays affecting the quality of wine produced in France? So basically he's talking, I'm sure, about the impact of the climate change all over the world, and in particular in France.
Well, global warming, yeah, global warming is it's complex because so if I'm just watching at the vineyards in the south of France and also in Spain, the very dry condition, very warm conditions, so it's difficult for the vines, less production than in the past. But what I can see also living in the Loire, which is more in the north part of France, the ripeness of the grapes is much better than it used to be in the past. Back 20, 30 years ago, sometimes people would add some sugar to the grape juice to increase the grape juice to produce to obtain a minimum degree of alcohol. So this is not the case anymore now, because the ripeness is, they have enough heat and sun to have a good ripeness for the grapes. But the problem with global warming, on one side, they produce better wine in the north part of France. But the other issue is that with global warming, the amplitude of temperature has increased. And so sometimes there are more and more regular frost in springs at times where they were not occurring in the past. So usually the vines, they start to grow in the beginning of April. And today, with global warming, with this highest amplitude of temperatures, the frost occurs also in April. So it will destroy part of the coming productions. So first, there is this issue about the ripeness of the grapes, but also of the damage due to this different level of amplitude of temperatures. So in general, if you look at all the insights, the figures of the wine productions, if you look at back and you look at the 20 last vintages in France, you will see that the average volume of productions has decreased years after years. The average, I mean.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we can add also to this, Alexis, that some big owners nowadays are buying lands and big pieces of vineyards in the north of France and in England as well, because of the global warming.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. In Germany, in South England, in places that they were too cold to produce grapes, now they're starting to produce wine, but they will have the same issues with this high amplitude. Every year will be different. So
right. So another question that we have here is, thank you, Alexis. What is your opinion about the new varieties of wine, just like the blue wine? So what do you think of that?
The blue wine.
Is it a trend? Is it something interesting? What about the taste?
So blue wine, to be honest, I have no idea because I've never tasted blue wine. We don't find this in France. No, there is one thing which is new in France, is the orange wine. So orange wine, it's because traditionally when you make a white wine, you press the grapes to get the sugar, to get the juice, and you do the fermentation, but you also remove all the skin. And today, some wineries, they have started to do some what they call whites of macerations. So they produce whites the same way as reds. So they let the skin in in the fermentation, in the tanks when they do the winemaking process. And so this gives tannin and this strong orange color to the wine. So it's still very rare, and that's a minority, but that's another types of whites coming in, very interesting, that you can find a bit in the Loire Valley or in the Jura. But about the new grape variety, you know, in France, the production is very controlled and restricted, especially if you want to produce a wine within an appellation, because all these appellations, they have some specifications about the grape varieties. You cannot do what you want, and if you want to grow a new grape varieties, well, you cannot be within the appellations, and you have to declare your wine as a vin de France, for instance. So some wine growers, they're doing some experiments, so leaving a bit the strict frame of the appellations. But I think in the future, people cannot miss, and they have to look at these new varieties, because some will be more well adapted to global warming, for instance, or to resist to disease that occurs more and more in the vineyards. So in France, we have these strict appellations that need to be a bit moved if we want to move forward and look at the results coming from new grape varieties.
Okay, that's great, very clear. One more thing, someone is asking actually about the champagne, okay, because I think you mentioned the white champagne. So if we can a bit explain about the rosé champagne as well.
Yeah, rosé. So yes, I didn't talk about rosé champagne. So it's still a small production, but a bit increasing every year because it's getting more popular. Champagne is the only region where they can blend a red wine, a white wine, and make a rosé. They can do this in Champagne. So to produce a rosé champagne, you need to have some red juice or red varieties. So in a rosé champagne, you will always have a bit of Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. And that's nice because you have some additional flavors of red fruits and strawberries. And I think a rosé champagne, sorry, is a great option if you want to, if you go to a restaurant and you want to order just one bottle for your whole dinner. That's a good option because sometimes I can see that the rosé champagne, they're a bit stronger in taste and they can really stand some more spicy and heavier food. So for me, it's a good option if I want to have some sparkling for all my dinner, for instance.
Okay, that seems great. Thank you for the answers, Alexis. I'm trying to see if there are any other questions, but I guess we're done with the questions. In case someone has any question in the future, please do not hesitate to write us. We will definitely either answer you or connect with Alexis in order to answer all your questions in the future webinars that we are going to organize as well with Alexis later on. And maybe we will be tackling and addressing other interesting issues regarding grape varieties, regarding the terroir, regarding maybe also how to read labels, the different appellations to go and to dig even further into those types of those terms, terminologies, and also appellations. Let me see, I think, oh, okay. So they are thanking us as well on the chat messages. Let me see on Facebook if there are any questions as well. Petra Shlid is telling us very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Petra. You're welcome in this webinar. Sabina Bustani, très intéressant. Merci, Sabina. Thank you for the lovely presentation. Thank you. So I guess we're done for tonight. Thank you very much, Alexis.
Thank you very much.
And we'll definitely see you very soon with other webinars focusing on either champagne, wines, or both. It could be both as well.
Sure. I will be happy to be here and to answer, to continue to pass on my knowledge, and that's always a pleasure to answer your question and to promote French wine, of course.
And anyway, we will definitely be offering very soon master classes on our platform. So it will be coming soon, hopefully in the fall season. Okay, and we'll definitely be spreading the word and informing our followers accordingly.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you.